The sun is 15 minutes from the horizon. The Strait of Hormuz, 33 miles wide at its narrowest point, watched at that narrowest point by every satellite, every signals intelligence platform, and every naval patrol asset that 4 decades of strategic anxiety can buy, sits in the amber half-light between day and dark. This window, this deliberate gap between satellite passes and the moment when full night vision coverage comes online across the fleet, is not an accident. It was chosen. Someone sat in a room with a tide chart, a satellite overpass schedule, and a nautical almanac and circled this exact window in pen. 15 minutes of relative blindness. 15 minutes where the water is too dark for optical sensors and too bright for thermal, where radar sees hulls but not what goes over the rail. It is in this window that an ERG fast boat throttles hard into a designated shipping lane and begins dropping mines. Not one, not two, a string of them. Contact-fused naval mines, buoyant, spray-painted the dull gray of the water at dusk. Tethered just below the surface on short cables so they ride with the chop. The mines themselves are not sophisticated by the standards of modern naval warfare. They are blunt instruments. Steel shells packed with high explosive, triggered by physical contact with a hull. But blunt instruments, placed correctly, have closed waterways before. The boat's crew works fast. They've done this in rehearsal. Each mine goes over the rail with a practice shove, a quiet splash, and a dull clank as the anchor catches and the cable goes taut. The crew chief counts under his breath. He's watching the stopwatch on his wrist more than he's watching the water. Within 8 minutes, they've seeded a diagonal line across the eastern transit lane, the lane a loaded tanker convoy is using right now, inbound from the Gulf of Oman, 42 minutes out. The fast boat opens up its twin outboards and runs for the Iranian coast. Here's what the IRGC commander is banking on: that the mines stay undetected long enough for the convoy to enter the seeded zone. That one strike on one hull triggers a closure. That headline start running within the hour. Hormuz mined, tanker traffic halted. That's the play. It costs almost nothing. It doesn't require a warship. It doesn't require a missile. A fast boat, a crew of 5, and maybe a dozen mines, and you've done what a fleet action might not. You've threatened to shut the valve on a fifth of the world's oil supply. The beauty of the mine, from the attacker's perspective, is its persistence. A mine doesn't go home. A mine doesn't run out of fuel. A mine sits exactly where you put it and waits, and the ship that strikes it doesn't know it's there until the hull buckles. What the IRGC commander did not count on was what was already airborne, already in the water, already watching. 31 miles north of the mine drop, the USS Fitzgerald, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, 9,000 tons of guided missile warship, is on patrol. She's been on patrol in this corridor for 11 consecutive days. Her crew is not bored. They are calibrated. There is a difference, and it matters. Bored crews miss things. Calibrated crews have reduced the act of watching to a set of thresholds. If this number crosses this line, you call it full stop, no deliberation. The Fitzgerald's Combat Information Center has been tracking the ERG fast boat since it departed its berth on the Iranian side. Not because of anything the boat did wrong, but because every ERG fast boat in the lower Gulf is tracked the moment it leaves a dock. That is the baseline. That is the standard the Fifth Fleet has held in this strait for 2 decades. The CIC on an Arleigh Burke is a compartment of controlled intensity. Rows of consoles, each one pulling data from a different sensor suite. The SY-1D phased array radar painting the surface picture, the SQS-53 hull sonar listening below it, the SLQ-32 electronic warfare system cataloging every emission in the electromagnetic spectrum. The watch officers rotate in 4-hour shifts, but the picture never goes dark. There is always someone at those consoles. Always someone whose job it is to notice the thing that changed. When the fast boat deviates from its patrol pattern and holds position in the eastern transit lane for 8 minutes and 20 seconds, the CIC watch officer doesn't wait for an explanation. He calls it. Possible mine-laying activity, eastern lane grid reference follows. The call goes up the chain in under 60 seconds. An SH-60 Seahawk helicopter, already airborne on routine patrol, already within redirect range, receives new tasking. Its crew of 4 banks southeast and drops to 200 feet over the water. 200 feet at night over open ocean is not comfortable flying. The rotor wash throws spray. The horizon line dissolves into haze. But the crew has done this before, and the instruments don't care about comfort. The Seahawk carries a towed sonar array, the ANSA QS-22, built for submarine hunting but equally capable of detecting the acoustic signature of mine sitting just below the surface. The array trails behind the aircraft on a cable, skimming the water, listening. The pilot follows the ghost of the fast boat's track, cross-referenced by the Fitzgerald's radar plot. The sonar operator's screen begins painting contacts. 1, a pause, 3 more loose diagonal, then 2 more, then another cluster. The lane is seeded. The SH-60 climbs marks each GPS coordinate with precision measured in meters and relays the full picture to the Fitzgerald and to the EOD detachment aboard. The data arrives on the Fitzgerald's tactical display as a series of red symbols, each one a confirmed subsurface contact in an active shipping lane. Elapsed time since the fast boat cleared the lane, 4 minutes, 11 seconds. This is where it gets precise. The strangest part of this whole operation, and I mean this, is not the speed of the American response. It's the quiet. No alarm, no all hands, no emergency broadcast crackling through the ship's interior announcing a crisis. The crew of the Fitzgerald goes to work the way a surgical team goes to work, calmly, by procedure, every person knowing exactly what role they're filling in the next 14 minutes. The commanding officer is in the CIC. He's been there since the deviation call. He issues 3 orders in the first 2 minutes. Then he steps back and lets his people work. The Fitzgerald moves into the seated zone at reduced speed, 8 knots, bow onto the mine line, using her hull-mounted sonar to cross-verify contacts the SH-60 has already marked. 8 knots is slow for a destroyer. It feels deliberate. Every confirmed contact gets a marker buoy, a small orange float deployed from the ship's fantail that vobs up exactly where a mine sits below. From the air, the lane now looks like a dotted line drawn in orange across black water. From the Fitzgerald's bridge, it looks like a field of hazard markers in a construction zone. 9 of them, evenly spaced enough that you can see the pattern. The diagonal cut across the lane designed to catch a ship no matter which side it was running on. High above, 4,500 feet, invisible in the darkening sky, running without lights and without a transponder signal, the boat recognize an MQ-9 Reaper loiters in a slow orbit. Its cameras are on the Iranian coast, specifically on the berth the fast boat is making for. The Reaper's electro-optical sensor carries a resolution sharp enough at that altitude to read hull numbers. It is watching the boat come home. The feed goes to 2 places simultaneously, the Fitzgerald CIC and a joint operations center ashore. The fast boat thinks it has run clean. It hasn't. Every nautical mile of its retreat is being recorded, tagged, and stored with timestamps accurate to the second. The crew doesn't know that yet. We'll come back to that. Here's what most people assume about mine clearing, that it's a slow, days-long process requiring dedicated minesweeper vessels, specialized underwater robots, and a harbor closure that makes the evening news. That assumption is correct in some contexts. A harbor, a wide anchorage, a coastline where you don't know the mine density. It is wrong, specifically and importantly wrong, when Navy EOD divers are already in position and the minefield is mapped. And on this day, attached to the Fitzgerald, there is an EOD mobile unit detachment, 6 divers, trained for exactly this scenario, not as a theoretical exercise, but as a rehearsed sequence with a time standard attached. They've practiced mine neutralization in open water, in harbors, in zero visibility night dives, where the only information your hands can give you is what your fingers find in the dark. The Hormuz at dusk, with soft amber light still skimming the surface in a calm sea state, is actually better conditions than half their training evolutions. Put yourself in the dive team leader's position for a second. You're looking at a GPS plot with 9 confirmed mine contacts in a live shipping lane. A 42-ship convoy is 40 minutes out and doesn't know the lane is seeded. Your job is not to study the problem. Your job is not to escalate to someone who might escalate to someone else. Your job is to get in the water and solve it within a time window that leaves margin for error. You've done the math already. 9 mines, 3 teams, working in sequence. You know what 14 minutes looks like in rehearsal. Now you're doing it live. The first pair of divers enters the water from the Fitzgerald stern at the 7-minute mark, 47 seconds after the mine count was confirmed and the GPS coordinates were pushed to their dive boards. They're carrying Mk-39 Mod 2 explosive charges, small, shaped, designed to cut the mine's mooring cable and render the firing mechanism inert without triggering the main charge. The charge itself is about the size of a thick paperback book. The drill is, approach from below, confirm the mine type by touch and sight, attach the charge to the cable junction at the base of the mine body, set a 30-second delay timer, and move clear. 30 seconds. Then a muffled underwater thump, not an explosion so much as a concussive pop you feel in your chest more than here. Then the mine floats dead to the surface, mooring severed, firing circuit open, as dangerous as an empty barrel. The second pair follows the first into the water 60 seconds later, targeting the next cluster. The third pair is in after another 60 seconds. 3 pairs, working in sequence, each responsible for a defined section of the seeded line. The SH-60 Seahawk orbits above them at reduced altitude, maintaining sonar watch in case any contact was missed on the first pass, and providing the continuous surface picture to the Fitzgerald CIC so the commanding officer knows exactly where his divers are relative to each mine at every moment. One detail that stuck with me when going through the operational sequence: the divers work without speaking on the surface. They use hand signals before they submerge. Once they're in the water, there's nothing to say. Each man knows his task and his partner's task, and conversation at that point is just noise. The mine's contact fuse is pressure sensitive, but there are older Iranian mine designs in the Gulf, Soviet-era derivatives, copies of the M08 and the AMD series that carry acoustic triggers as a secondary fuse mechanism. Legacy hardware that Iran has maintained modified, and reportedly improved over 3 decades. You do not bang things together. You do not shout through your regulator. You move through the water with the deliberate softness of someone who understands exactly what's on the other end of the cable they're reaching for. Mine 1 neutralized. Cable cut, charge set, detonation clean. The mine surface is 30 meters east of the Fitzgerald's hull. Riding low in the water, its gray paint making it nearly invisible until a ribbed crew from the ship puts a spotlight on it. A petty officer with a boat hook guides it alongside. It gets photographed from 6 angles before anyone touches it further. Mine 2, 3, 4. Same drill. The second team's moving faster now. They've calibrated to this specific mine type, the approach angle, the cable tension at this tether depth, the exact position of the cable junction relative to the mine's lower housing. Their hands know the hardware the way a mechanic's hands know an engine they've rebuilt twice. Muscle memory doing work that conscious thought would slow down. Mine 5 brings the first complication. The tether cable on Mine 5 is wrapped. The mine has drifted slightly with the current in the time since it was laid and wound itself around a piece of subsurface debris, possibly an old anchor chain from a vessel that passed through years ago and dragged it along the bottom before it broke. The diver can't cut the cable at the junction because the junction is buried in the tangle, inaccessible without disturbing the debris in a way that could create unpredictable tension on the mine body. He signals his partner. 2 hands, one pointing at the tangle, one drawing a circle, reposition. 30 seconds of underwater problem solving, no words, no supervisor to approve the decision. He repositions, finds a clean section of cable 18 inches above the tangle where the line runs free, sets the charge there instead. The geometry isn't ideal. The cut will be higher on the cable than the procedure specifies, but the math works. The mine will float free. It works. The mine surfaces. Mine 6 and 7 go clean. Mine 8 is the deepest, set at 6 meters instead of the standard 3 to 4, probably a variation in the tether length rather than an intentional tactical choice. But 6 meters in failing light means the diver is working in conditions that are functionally equivalent to night. He's navigating by the green glow of his diveboard display and by touch. He takes an extra 40 seconds locating the cable junction, another 8 getting the charge seated correctly. The SH-60 operator calls the update to the Fitzgerald. CIC notes it. The Convoy is now 28 minutes out. Mine 9, the last in the line, goes at the 13-minute and 44-second mark. 14 seconds later, the Fitzgerald CIC clears the lane. The Convoy does not slow down, it does not divert. The lead vessel's navigator, watching his chart plotter, sees the Fitzgerald holding position ahead of him and notes the destroyer's unusual track. The slow, deliberate sweep across the lane, but the channel is open. The traffic separation scheme is in effect, and his AIS shows no navigational warning in force. He proceeds. 41 tankers in column, the lead vessel, a VLCC loaded with crude from Basra, drawing 22 meters, carrying 2 million barrels of oil, passing the last marker buoy with 300 meters of clearance on either side. The crew of that tanker does not know what happened in the water ahead of them 41 minutes ago. They see the Fitzgerald on their radar, note the destroyer on their starboard beam, and proceed. Cargo delivered, supply chain intact. Somewhere on the Iranian coast, the IRGC boat crew ties up at their berth, shuts down the engines, and waits for the news that the convoy was stopped. They wait for the satellite reports. They wait for the signal from the intelligence network that monitors ship traffic out of the Gulf of Oman for disruptions. They wait for the headlines. They get nothing. The eastern lane is open. The convoy is through. The mines are on the surface of the water, dead and drifting, being recovered one by a rigid hull inflatable boat crew from the Fitzgerald who are cataloging each one, photographing the hull markings, the fuse assemblies, the anchor configurations, and bagging the serial numbers where they're legible for intelligence analysis back ashore. Here is what that intelligence analysis will eventually tell someone in a windowless room. The mine design, the tether lengths, the fuse types, and the specific diagonal pattern of the seated line are all consistent with IRGC Navy doctrine from a particular training cycle. That pattern has a provenance. It can be traced. It is being traced. Here's the take that'll probably get us pushback, but it needs to be said. The IRGC commander who ordered this operation either knew it would fail and dropped the mines anyway for the optics of having tried, or genuinely believed a string of 9 contact mines would close the most heavily monitored waterway on the planet against a Navy that has been preparing for exactly this scenario for 20-plus years. Both possibilities are damning. Either Iran is running bluffs it knows won't land, burning operational assets and trained crews for headlines it won't get, or it's intelligence. Picture of US EOD readiness in the Strait is so degraded that it doesn't know what it's up against. Neither of those is a strong position. One is cynical, the other is blind, and the difference between them matters for what comes next. Now back to the fast boat, and to the Reaper. The MQ-9 has been recording the boat's track for the entire operation. Every course change, every throttle adjustment, every moment the crew moved on the open deck, visible in infrared at 4,500 feet. By the time the last mine is neutralized, the Reaper has logged the boat's full return route, its speed profile, the moment it throttled back as it approached its berth, consistent with a crew that believes the mission is complete and the danger is past, and the berth coordinates down to the meter. The feed has been archived. The boat's hull markings, visible in the last daylight from that altitude, are in the intelligence record. The crew's movements on the dock after they tied up are in the record. The vehicle that met them at the waterfront and drove 2 of the crew away is in the record, including its direction of travel and the time it departed. What happens to that information? That depends on decisions made at levels above the Fitzgerald's commanding officer and above the 5th Fleet commander. The strike option exists. The Reaper carries Hellfire missiles with precision fusing. An Arleigh Burke carries Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles with a range of 1,000 miles and a circular error probable measured in feet. The berth coordinates are in the system. Whether the trigger is pulled on that boat tonight, next week, or held in reserve as a retaliatory option in response to the next incident is a policy decision, not a capability gap. The capability is not the question. It never was. What matters most here isn't the decision that was or wasn't made. It's that the decision now exists. The IRGC boat thought it ran clean. It did not. Its crew conducted what they believed was an anonymous operation with deniable assets. No warship, no unit markings that couldn't be attributed to a dozen different IRGC components, no communication on frequencies that would give them away. They are now a named entry in a targeting database with associated imagery, a GPS track, a berth location, and a vehicle registration. That is a very different situation from the one they were in this morning when they left the dock. Here's what this tells us about the IRGC's mine strategy in Hormuz. It was designed for a version of the U.S. Navy that no longer exists. The mine threat in the strait is decades old. It traces back to the tanker war of the 1980s, when Iranian mines damaged dozens of ships and the U.S. response was reactive, coalition-dependent, and measured in days rather than minutes. The USS Samuel B. Roberts hit a mine in 1988. The response was Operation Praying Mantis, a one-day surface action that destroyed 2 Iranian oil platforms and sank or damaged several Iranian warships. Effective, eventually, not fast. The IRGC's playbook here assumes a detection gap that has since been closed by 20 years of persistent ISR integration. It assumes a response time measured in hours, a convoy that has no choice but to stop or divert, a news cycle that runs the Hormuz mined headline before the clearance story can catch up. What it ran into instead was persistent satellite and aerial coverage that never actually lapsed, pre-positioned EOD assets that didn't need to transit from a distant port, and a crew that had rehearsed this exact scenario until 14 minutes was a comfortable margin with room for the complications that always come up in live operations. The gap between what Iran planned for and what Iran found is the whole story. The Strait of Hormuz handles roughly 21 million barrels of oil per day, about 21% of global petroleum liquids, passing through a choke point 33 miles wide down a shipping lane that narrows the usable channel to something closer to 2 miles when you account for depth restrictions and the traffic separation scheme. When Iran threatens to close it, markets move within hours. Lloyd's of London adjusts its war risk premiums for the entire Gulf region. Shipping companies reroute what they can reroute and absorb the insurance cost on what they can't. The threat carries economic weight entirely independent of whether it succeeds militarily, because the people managing billion-dollar cargo decisions don't wait for operational confirmation. They react to the possibility. That's the actual leverage Iran holds, not the ability to close the strait for a week, but the ability to make commodity markets nervous about whether it might close it for a day. 9 mines cleared in 14 minutes does not close the strait. But if nobody talked about the clearance, if the convoy's passage went unreported, and only the mine laying made news, Iran wins the headline anyway. The operation was never primarily about sinking a tanker. It was about the image of a mined Hormuz, about the ticker crawling across the bottom of a Bloomberg terminal that reads IRGC mines Hormuz transit lane. Whether that image survives the full story, the story of what happened in the 14 minutes after the fast boat ran, depends entirely on whether the full story gets told. We'll say what most won't say plainly. The mine drop failed on every level that matters operationally. If Iran's goal was to demonstrate asymmetric capability against a conventionally superior navy, it demonstrated the opposite. It demonstrated that its cheapest asymmetric weapon, the one it has held in reserve for decades as the great equalizer, the thing that could theoretically deny the strait to a carrier group, can be found, mapped, and cleared faster than the crew that laid it can get back to shore and make a phone call. What does this mean for the next time? That's the question worth sitting with. The Strait of Hormuz is not a static problem. It never has been. The IRGC will study this failure with the same institutional seriousness they bring to their successes. They will obtain whatever signals intelligence they can about the U.S. response timeline, when the deviation was called, when the SH-60 was redirected, when the divers hit the water. They will look at the detection timeline and ask where the gap was. Was it the departure from the berth? The hold position in the lane, the mine type that passive sonar reads too easily at that tether depth? They will ask whether a different fusing system, pressure differential instead of contact, acoustic instead of mechanical, would have complicated the EOD approach enough to matter. They will ask whether simultaneous decoy operations could split the available EOD resources and extend the clearance timeline past the convoy's arrival. Iran has the institutional knowledge to iterate on failure. It has done so before, and it has the motivation because the Strait is the one card in its hand that every counterparty is afraid of, regardless of whether it can actually be played. The U.S. Navy's answer to that iteration is the same as it has always been. More rehearsal, better sensor integration, deeper pre-positioning of EOD assets across the 5th Fleet's area of responsibility, and the ISR coverage that makes every IRGC vessel movement a data point whether it leads to an operation or not. The Fitzgerald's crew didn't scramble in response to the mine drop. They were already there, already watching, already positioned within redirect range. The divers were already attached to the ship. The Reaper was already on station. That's not a reaction. That's a posture. And the difference between a reaction and a posture is the difference between 14 minutes and 4 hours. If you're in the comments, here's the question I want you to answer, and I mean answer it specifically, not generally. Was the IRGC commander running a real operation or a bluff? Because those are two completely different strategic calculations with two completely different implications for what happens next. A real operation assumes you have a credible belief that you can cede the lane, hold detection long enough for the convoy to enter the ceded zone, and produce a strike that closes the traffic flow for long enough to matter, economically and politically. A bluff assumes you just need the attempt on record. You need Tehran to be able to point at a map in a briefing room and say we mined Hormuz and the Americans scrambled, and that costs us nothing we weren't willing to spend. If it's a bluff, then the 14-minute clearance is almost beside the point. The mine drop itself was the message, and whether the mine stayed in the water or not was secondary to the act of placing them. If it's a real operation, then the IRGC's intelligence picture of US EOD readiness in the Strait is not just outdated, it's dangerously operationally wrong, and that gap is going to cost them in ways they haven't finished calculating yet. Comment your read. We read everything. The convoy is through. The lane is open. The fast boat is in a database it will never see, attached to coordinates it doesn't know were recorded, with a crew that went to sleep tonight believing the operation was clean. And somewhere in the lower Gulf tonight, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer is back on patrol, her crew calm, her systems watching every departure from every Iranian berth within sensor range, her EOD divers dry again and ready for the next call the moment the CIC watch officer sees a fast boat hold position where it shouldn't. The Strait is open. It stayed open. That's not luck. That's not even entirely technology. That's 14 minutes of the most prepared, most rehearsed, most persistently postured naval force in history doing exactly what it trains to do, quietly enough that 41 tanker crews sailed through without knowing the water ahead of them had been cleared while they were still an hour out. If you want to see how the next escalation unfolds, the one the IRGC is already planning in response to this failure, the adjusted version with the details they think they've identified as the gap, stay with us. It's already in production.